Network is that it's not a banking system in the sense that the network commits without time limit to the processes of change.
Most of the multilateral banks, the United Nations, USAID, and advocacy organizations in the United States and Europe favor restructuring of aid away from traditional government-to-government approaches towards people-to-people programs. The new objectives of the development models can be achieved much more cost-effectively through NGOs. This is primarily because NGOs tend to be a flexible vehicle for meeting a variety of human needs, including self-expression or empowerment, promoting equity, self-help, participation, and mutual assistance.
The network is a multi-input system. We'd like to impact areas of Syrian development, not just one. And therefore we're looking at support in education, we're looking at support in healthcare, we're looking at support in economic development, we're looking at support in cultural development.
NGOs exist to render the work of civil society. As claimed, civil society is the process in which the volunteer efforts of the community members seek to assist the marginalized and less fortunate. Sounds like a great idea. To replace paid services with voluntary actions really gives it a communist feel. This communist feeling should worsen when you realize that NGOs invest exclusively into marginalized groups. Now we have to consider that an investment into the marginalized is also an investment into counterculture.
This marginalization is so structured in society that minorities find it very difficult to break out of that situation.
Because of targeting and being responsive to marginalized groups in society, NGOs are being heralded as important vehicles for empowerment, democratization, and economic development. In fact, some NGOs are being driven by strong values and interests, geared toward empowering communities that have traditionally been disempowered.
Of marginalization that you speak of, that are divisive in so many ways.
It is these groups' failure to integrate into the dominant culture which has defined them as marginalized, and an investment in such groups is to venture in cultural and societal destruction. If the goal is cultural replacement, and the NGOs are the executive branch of the operations put forth by NPOs, we need to ask what function do they offer to a given nation and society? Does it strengthen a society through stability, or is it merely there to disrupt and replace?
Centrifugal forces in our time, the forces of fragmentation. These forces, I believe, can threaten the coherence of democratic societies and the effectiveness of democratic institutions.
Now that we have a better understanding as to the role and function of NGOs, as well as the synergistic relationship they share with NPOs as a labor force and action potential, the organization's from executive through to operations role is to offer relief, rehabilitation, and community development. Now, if we direct our attention to present-day application, the challenge seems to be in separating the concept of assistance from the concept of disruption, with disruption seeking conquest and replacement as its goal.
Now that issue of accepting pluralism also means that you need to attach equity to that notion. If there is no equity in pluralist societies, then you don't have functioning pluralist societies, you don't have institutions that function properly.
People who are counterculture and have the ambition to disrupt society seem to be the marginalized that the NGOs are in search of. Now you have to wonder if NGOs, and to a greater extent NPOs' role is disruption. Are they acting in a conquest capacity? And if so, who is the authoritative body?
Who's showing leadership?
I think there are a number of people in the UN system who've shown leadership, who have shown balanced judgment on these issues, because when all is said and done, it's the balance of the judgment that counts, and it's understanding the issue.
We have to keep in mind that NGOs funding comes from governments. And who is the largest body who acts in the interests of cooperative governance? the United Nations. The larger foundations, such as the Aga Khans, the Clintons, the Fords, and the Gates, are not even listed on the United Nations membership list. As it turns out, the title foundation is nothing more than marketing, and in fact, they are registered as an NGO. So why is it that the foundations wouldn't be registered on the United Nations membership list? Could it be that the foundations are integrated directly in the United Nations? Non-government organization, NGO. Are they attempting to replace our government?
I think you will see governments fail because they do not practice this principle. They will have so many divisions within them, so many attempts at achieving positions of power by certain groups or influenced by others, that it will be impossible to create a sense of nationhood, a sense of building around common values, which after all is what most governments would wish to have.
We never see the third world poor rise out of poverty. Rather, we see greater levels of poverty in the first. NGO's aid, based on present application, seems to be prioritized towards the first world, which leads to the question, what development is taking place in the first world? Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, and South Africa. These are all countries which have been overtaken by NGOs, and are also countries that the Aga Khans heavily invested in, from media and renewable energies to agriculture and finance. What I find most unsettling is the fact that our acts of goodwill and charity seem to be used against us. And even more troubling is the fact that the groups that our goodwill has been directed towards seem to have been weaponized. Now let's take a look at the NPOs who represent the marginalized, the investment of the NGOs. Let's see how they've contributed to the betterment of society. The LGBT, attempting to destroy Christianity, the foundation of Western culture. BLM, disrupting security and policing, that which keeps us safe. Feminism, destroying the family, the death of the next generation. The interesting thing here is that as Christianity breaks down, it seems that it is being replaced by Islam. And oddly enough, he who is the primary investor in the marginalized is none other than the Aga Khan, an Islamic leader.
Also trying to work with young people in various areas, just tell to them, create according to your own value system. You don't have to copy other people's value systems. Modernization does not mean Occidentalization.
Under the new policy agenda, NGOs are seen as vehicles for democratization as well as for providing goods and services. Donor agencies now favor new and innovative development strategies, such as the minimalist, cost-effective approach used by microfinancing institutions, assisted self-reliance, or participatory development.
We found that this whole area of microfinance, which in simple terms is lending on trust, is an extraordinarily powerful way to support poor people in many different ways, because it can be for education, it can be for healthcare, it can be for cultural rehabilitation, it can be for commerce. There are practically no limits.
NGOs appear well suited to adapt the use of new and innovative strategies because of their small scale, flexibility, and wide-ranging capacity to mobilize resources and to organize people to solve their own problems.
Private initiative, and not necessarily initiative for profit, just private initiative, civil society.
Civil society, the private industry masquerading as institution. Like, share, and subscribe. Click that notification button and check us out on social media. Links are in the description below.